you might not realise this, but a recent investigation by the Taxpayers Alliance has found that you, the British taxpayer, have helped pay for the organisation of the latest round of strikes by unions such as the RMT. Now, through trade union facility time, union reps in the public sector can commit a portion of their working hours to union duties, all at the expense of taxpayers, right? While we pay in, they walk out, in quotes. Now, last year, in the financial year, this cost taxpayers almost £100 million. That's the highest value since the Cabinet Office began publishing this data. And joining me in the studio is the Investigative Campaigns Manager of the Taxpayers Alliance, Elliot Keck. Hello, Elliot.
Thanks for having me on, Johnny. Great to be here.
It's nice to have you. Now, death and taxes, I mean, they've always been inevitable, but we have been steadily paying more tax since Tony Blair was Prime Minister, and it just seems to be going on and on and on.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. It's at a 70-year high. There's very, very little sign of it seriously going down. Obviously, we've got the national insurance taxation threshold going up at the end of this month, and that will come as welcome relief. But for most people, actually, that's just going to revert to how things were a few months ago. And during cost of living crisis, when inflation's at 9–10%, one of the easiest ways, I think, to put money back in people's pockets would actually just be to start trimming those excessive taxes. So, yeah, absolutely. It's a big problem.
And, of course, we're still paying for the pandemic, and we might be paying for years, and now interest rates are up. And that was the problem, excuse me, with the last three governments, actually, going back to Gordon Brown. We lived in a hyper-low interest rate economy, and so they could kick the can in the future, borrow like Billio. Yeah. But now the game's up, isn't it? I mean, interest rates are just going up and up and up, and the billions of pounds worth of borrowing the government do have to be repaid in the here and now.
And that's the other side of the coin as well. I mean, we talk about tax cuts on the one hand, but we also need to see a serious programme of government spending cuts really right across the board. There's an extraordinary amount of waste across the public sector, which, you know, we're uncovering day in, day out. And, you know, on top of that now, we find out that taxpayers are actually, as you mentioned, subsidising the very strikes that are stopping them from getting to work. You explained it terrifically well, trade union facility times. This is paid time off for public sector workers. Some of them, 100% of their working hours are devoted to trade union activities, about 1,000 of them, but 24,000 in total spend some portion on trade union duties and activities. And, you know, whether or not you're in favour of these strikes, I think most people should accept that actually this is completely inappropriate. And so we've set up a petition, taxpayersalliance.com/strikes. And what that will allow people to do is essentially channel their frustration, say, do you know what, maybe these subsidies are inappropriate and should be, if not brought to a halt, then certainly capped.
And this is like institutionalising union power, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because, OK, it's a decent society which gives the union some sort of power, but it can be regulated, it can be, not removed, but it can be reduced, can't it?
Yeah, I mean, we don't call for it to be abolished, critically. No. We call for a cap. So what we say is currently the civil service average is that 0.05% of their pay bill can go to wages for trade union facility time, and we say the whole public sector should be capped at that. We also say that no individual public sector worker should be able to spend more than 50% of their time on trade union duties. I think that's very reasonable. People expect their public sector workers that they pay for out of their taxes to be devoted to delivering the services that taxpayers pay for, and for them to spend even half of their time, I think it's not an unreasonable cap to play. So again, taxpayersalliance.com/strikes for anybody that is feeling that frustration and wants to sort of, you know, make that frustration known to the government and to the Cabinet Office.
Now, the narrative that was going around a few weeks ago was that inflation was a new shock, Elliot, but of course now we are seeing that one of the real problems of inflation is a public sector determination to renegotiate wages. Okay, and we're going to now start seeing a return to the sort of pre-Thatcher era, this is before you were born, Elliot, of industrial strife, where essentially public sector people were told not to strike, not to ask for pay rises because we get into the death spiral of inflation. But the truth of the matter is, if inflation is peaking at 9 or 10 or even 11%, you can't give people 1 and 2%, especially as wages have been stagnant, really, throughout the last 3 to 5 years.
Well, I think it just shows why it's so important to bring inflation down. But it is interesting, isn't it? I mean, there's a lot of numbers bandied about exactly what the median pay of the people striking is. Some people say 32,000, some people say more like 40,000. I mean, either way, it's above the median salary of the average UK worker. But all of these people will have been hit by that national insurance rise that came in April, and they will have been hit by the personal allowances being frozen at the £12,500 that it was frozen at. So it is really interesting. I mean, one does wonder if government had been more serious about cutting taxes, and particularly cutting taxes for those on low and middle incomes, would the people striking now actually think, you know what, I'm not seeing, things aren't quite as bad as they could have been. I am keeping more of my own money. I'm seeing my, tax threshold go up. No national insurance rise. So I think those things have definitely compounded the difficulties that, railway workers are absolutely going to be feeling. So, there is some sympathy with them in that regard, I think.
Elliot, there is one good thing about inflation in terms of national debt and in terms of government borrowing, is that it shrinks the government borrowing in real terms, not in money terms. But if we're starting to see a 10% rise in the cost of living, the £170 billion debt or whatever it is suddenly worth 10% less this time next year. So might we see nearer an election some tax cuts?
Well, tax cuts should come at any point in the electoral cycle. But I mean, I think unfortunately, right. I'm going to say that, of course. But unfortunately, a lot of that government debt is linked to inflation. So I think this idea that inflation is going to be a serious way to bring down the government debt burden is not a serious suggestion. The only serious way to do that is through a serious programme of government spending cuts.
So is that likely under this government? Because they're not a traditional Tory tax-cutting government. They resemble, actually, a fiscal sort of Gordon Brown, Tony Blair government. It seems like a continuation of New Labour in many ways. Well,
I think you're right to say that there's not much sign of it at the moment, but, we can all keep our fingers crossed, and hopefully if we continue to expose the waste that we're exposing, somebody in the Treasury may take notice.
And do you think strikes will be an increasing strife for us this summer, do you think, because of inflation, because of this situation?
Well, yeah, I mean, the TfL's union have just announced that they've extended their strike remit by 6 months. RMT, Mick Lynch is talking about possible further strike action. So I think it's absolutely a potential. And again, I say to your viewers, if you're feeling frustrated, if you're feeling angry, and if you're fed up of subsidising these strikes in the way that you are, through the trade union facility time we've discussed, and taxpayersalliance.com/strikes, and that petition will be going straight to the Cabinet Office, and it will have not your name and itself, it will have the fact that you've signed that all over it, and we'll send a clear message to the government.
You can make a difference. That's Elliot Keck. Thank you very much. Elliot is Investigative Campaigns Manager for the Taxpayers Alliance. Elliot, thank you very much for coming in this Saturday afternoon.